All right, it is September 22nd. It's a Tuesday, and we are looking at Genesis 49, 1 to 12. And we're getting again to the tail end. The story pretty much is kind of over in terms of all that. The story is pretty much over in the sense that the Joseph story is coming to a close. And we're kind of getting to the tail end where it's all about like blessings and just getting us ready for actually the book of Exodus. And so let me pray for us and we will get started, all right? Lord, we just thank you for this time as we gather. May your word give us guidance, leading us to your presence. May it cause in us a desire to know you more. And in that knowing, Lord, may that bring us peace. May that transform our hearts from anxious hearts to calm hearts. And we know, Lord, that there's a lot of things that are going on in our lives right now. But Lord, remind us that amidst of all that is going on, that you are consistently, constantly good. We thank you, Lord, and just I pray. Amen. All right. We're looking at Genesis 49, 1 to 12. I'll read for us, and we'll kind of take it section by section. So we're gonna look at verses 1 through 4, then we're gonna read 5 to 7, and then we're gonna stop off with 8 to 12. All right. 49, 1 through 4. Well, it says this. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel, for you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it." Now, chapter 49 is pretty much Israel giving us like his final blessings to his 12 sons. And they're going to be the kind of like the starters for the 12 tribes of Israel. And what you're going to realize is as Jacob is going to give blessings, that they not only are tailor-made to each individual and what they have done in the past and who they are in terms of their characteristic, but it also kind of lays out what their future is going to look like in light of that. And one thing that we have to think about in this chapter is this idea that how we have lived and how we live affects how we're going to live. Meaning, our actions of today and our actions of the past set up our actions for tomorrow. Now, does that mean that things can never change? That once things are done, it's done? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that what's done is done. But the outcome, the results, the direction can change if we change. So if I was angry in the past and I don't do anything about that, then most likely I'm going to continue to be angry and do angry acts later on. But knowing what I am and who I was, I can change, and that changes the direction of my future. That kind of shifts the future for us, right? And so for Reuben, he was a firstborn, and he was a man of excellence. He was a sign of Israel's strength, and he was a man of honor and power. But the second half of this promise and blessing is the idea that he will no longer do that because he couldn't control his lustful desires. Because Reuben, in the past, slept with one of Israel's concubines. Now, what that means is that that was a disrespectful act on behalf of Reuben and was something that was very frowned upon. And in light of that, Jacob says, "You were supposed to be the firstborn that received all the power, honor, authority, and the position to lead this family. But because of your dishonor, your honor is pretty much being stripped from you. You were excellent, but no longer will you be excellent because he can't keep control of his lustful desires." And that's the thing, right? Where when we lack honor, it diminishes our excellence and power for the long run. And so therefore for Reuben, the lesson is learning how to continue to walk in honor, not just in the beginning, but through the middle and end. I know there's a phrase like some people say to you, like, hey, it doesn't matter how you start, it just matters how you finish, right? Or on the flip side, the other people say, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter how you finish, but that the starting point is very important. I want to say unto you that how you start, how you live, and how you end all matters. And so rather than just focusing on one or the other, focus on just living a great life throughout, right? Let's say you did have a bad start. Okay, it happened. It's in the past. You can't change it, but you can change the moment. And see, this is the thing. A lot of times our struggle is either we're so future focused or past focused, but we are not present focused. Meaning, a lot of the people's fears in life is, what is my future going to be? And sometimes people's fears are what they have done in the past. They feel that guilt of the things that they have done in the past they shouldn't have done. So they're either past focused or future focused, but they fail to realize how important the present focus is. Because the present focus is influenced by the past, but the present focus also influences the future. And so we're so focused on the future or the past and not realizing how important the present is to deal with the past, but also set things up for the future. That middle portion. People want to focus on how you end, people want to focus on how you start. But what is also important, that's oftentimes kind of like the neglected middle child, is what about the moment now? Because how you live in the moment can actually deal with the problems of the past through healing and restoration and redemption. And how you live and the lifestyle that you choose to live now sets up your future. And for Reuben, he may have started well, but he has ended terribly because he couldn't control his present passions of lust. And so I'm just gonna give you guys a TLDR. The first three sons, it may look like they don't look like promises or blessings because it looks like they got punished, which they did. They got punished, but it's also a blessing because despite their flaws, oh, excuse me, despite their flaws, they still had portions of blessings from the Lord. And so that's grace. They didn't deserve it. They could have easily been cut out, but they still get a little portion. And so that's Reuben. Verse 5 through 7. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly. For they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they please. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. So Simeon and Levi, if you don't know, so their sister gets sexually assaulted, but the guy that sexually assaulted their sister wanted to actually marry her. He makes up this reason saying, I'm just so in love with her, I can't get her out of my mind, whatnot, right? And so Simeon and Levi, what they do is they trick him to trick his fellow townsmen and say, hey, we'll allow this to happen if you and all the males in your town follow our customs, which is particularly getting circumcised. And they do that. So while they all are recovering from being circumcised, Simeon and Levi get weapons and they just go around killing all the males of the town. And that's what this passage is referring to. He says, their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly, for they killed men in their anger. So Simeon and Levi are known to be people who are driven by anger and emotion. And you realize who's going to lead the 12 sons of Israel, who are going to be the 12 tribes of Israel. Already it's not going to be Reuben, because Reuben cannot control his lust. It's not going to be Simeon or Levi, because they are driven by anger and passion, unguided passion. And so for them to be the heads of the household are just no way. They're going to lead this family to ruin. So he says, you guys were people of passion, you guys were people of anger, and therefore you shall not be in these positions, right? And what's very interesting is I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. So later on, when the Israelites get the promised land, the 12 tribes of Israel split up the land according to their tribes. But what's very interesting is that on the way to the promised land, during the golden calf incident where Moses goes up in the mountain, and as he's in the mountain, he hasn't come back in a while, they go to Aaron, who is a Levite. They go to Aaron and say, hey, uh, we don't know what happened to Moses. Make us a god. And so they make this golden calf idol, and God comes down and he's pissed. Moses breaks the tablets of the Ten Commandments, the first set. There's two sets of Ten Commandments, because he broke the first set, so they had to remake a second one. And on that day, Moses says, who's going to stand for the Lord? And it is the Levites that stand up and say, we will be the instruments of God. And they were used as instruments to judge the rest of the other tribes through killing, right? But ever since then, the Lord said to the Levites, your inheritance won't be physical land. Your inheritance is me, because you jealously and passionately guarded my holiness. And so the Levites, when they get to the promised land, they don't get land for themselves. What happens is that they are spread throughout all of Israel and serve as kind of like priests and ministers of God's presence. And so this blessing, this promise is, I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. That actually literally happens. Levi, or the Levites, the priests, they become spread out all throughout Israel as a way of just being like, rather than all the priests being in one location, they're spread out throughout the whole nation of Israel, right? And so we're starting to see that their past action, they're getting punished. But there's also a future blessing in the sense that God redeems the Levites' passion to use them to be priests, whom their inheritance is not just a physical land, but God himself. And so the Levites get redeemed later on, right? And then we're going to look at verses 8 to 12. 8 to 12, it says Judah. Now, Judah gets a lot of verses in regards to his blessing and promise, and we'll see why. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. So Judah actually gets a lot. He almost gets like 1, 2, 3. He gets 5 verses in pertaining to his blessing and promise. Now we know that Judah, from the tribe of Judah comes Jesus. Now we have to understand, in the past story that we've just been on for weeks, Judah became a person where he was like now the spokesperson. Now he was the leader of the brothers, right? Because the way he approached the situation was that, for instance, Reuben, the firstborn, approached the situation at the end and says, if we don't bring back Benjamin, Dad, you can kill 2 of my sons. Wrong move. But Judah, on the flip side, not the oldest, comes up and says, hey, if this goes poorly for us, if this doesn't work out, I won't sacrifice my sons, but you could blame it on me. I will take the punishment and the shame for the rest of my life. Very reminiscent of Jesus, right? He says, even Jesus, like, all the sin of the world, I will be the bearer of that burden, that guilt. And so Judah is kind of like is being set up to be the great, like the times a lot, grandfather of Jesus. And you see Jesus come out of that, right? And this is like the first instance in the Old Testament where we're starting to see prophetic prophecies. I know that seems redundant, but I just felt like I had to say that. A prophetic word, a prophecy of the coming Messiah that's going to save all of creation, right? He says, the scepter will not depart from Judah. I mean, scepter is given to kings. They're the rulers. So this idea of royal ruler is never going to depart from Judah. And it says, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Meaning, all of the nations, all the world will obey this person, the Messiah. And so we see that Judah, coming from a place where he lived in his last moments as a sacrificial posture, willing to bear the burden of guilt for everybody and anybody within his own family, we see that gets passed on to Jesus. Now, I know Jesus is not saying that Jesus owes Judah anything, but Jesus comes from that line, right? And the thing that we can understand here today is this. A question I have for you, which was a question that God had for me this morning, was, how are you going to live now? Because how you live now determines what gets passed on later. And so I had to ask myself, because that's a big thing we've been tackling for the past couple of weeks, is the idea of family blessing, family curse. What are some family ways of living and thinking that are broken and not right, that just keeps getting passed on from father to son to son to their son and their son and their son? It could be daughter to mother to daughter. It doesn't matter. The fact is that there's things of brokenness that keeps getting passed on from generation to generation to generation. Likewise, not just brokenness, but blessing, blessing, blessing. And so the question we have to ask ourselves today is this. As we're going through the blessings of the 12 tribes of Israel, how are we living today that we know the way we live now and how what has been passed on to us, what are we going to pass on to the next generation? I know a lot of us are super young and that it's not even remotely in our minds, right? And rightfully so. But the question it still pertain to you is this. How are you going to live your life now? Because how you live your life now will trickle down in how you live your life later. It's the same thing like with this concept. I saw like, I want to say a couple days ago. It was like a random, like it was on my Instagram feed and I was just scrolling through and it was like, if you can't be faithful with $1,000, what makes you think you're gonna be faithful with 10,000? If you don't know how to take care of if you can't take care of $100, what makes you think you're gonna take care of $10,000? Just because the number's bigger doesn't mean you'll take care of it better. Likewise, we teach this at every mission course before we go on missions every summer. Well, not this one Passover, but the summer, right? Is like train as if you're already there. Why? Because some people have this mistaken belief that they could just turn it on whenever. But the reality is very few people just turn it on. And even if even if they could fake turning it on, it's not going to be the same. Why do we practice? Because how we practice also determines how we're going to play. And so you get this kind of theme, right? Where how we live in the day-to-day, how we live in the moment, how we live in the present definitely does affect our future outcomes and when the situations that we are preparing for arise. Because one day you might be saying, but I'm a kid, I'm this, I'm that, I'm not gonna have a family anytime soon. But man, how you live your life now, how you steward your emotions, how you steward your money, how you steward your body, how you steward your spiritual life, that all will play a factor, not just now, but for the future. So this idea, if you can't even walk with God now, what makes you think you're gonna walk with God later? If you can't take care of money now, what makes you think you're gonna take care of money later? I'm not saying you can't learn and grow and change, but this idea, there's never gonna be a later if you can't live in the moment and train now. Same thing with spirituality. What makes us believe that we can be great stewards of blessing for future blessings if we can't even steward the blessings of now? That quote that keeps wrecking me is this: why are we constantly praying for new blessing if you can't steward the blessing you already have? And when we look at today's passage, it's this idea that Simeon, Levi, Reuben, right? they by God's grace still get a piece of the promise, but man, they forfeit a lot of it because of the way they lived in the moment and how they lived. Whereas Judah, the redemptive fact of Judah was he didn't live well in the beginning, but he changed. And that is what changed the direction of his blessing and promise. So the question then to you and me today is, how are we going to live? Don't say we're going to follow God later when it's convenient. Things right now, if we're looking for a convenient time to follow God, then you're going to be waiting to all of eternity until you find yourself in a very place you don't want to be in. Why not now? How are you going to live now? Because it definitely affects the way you live tomorrow. It's like a domino effect. Doesn't mean it can't change direction, but the thing that we want to drive is that if we keep having this mentality, oh, I'll do it later, later never comes. It's like diet starts tomorrow. It should have started yesterday. If anything, why not now? And so, yeah, spirituality starts tomorrow. What about today? Because these blessings and promises given to these first four brothers, we end with Judah, and we notice that how we live now definitely does play a factor and role in how we live tomorrow, because it's not about just individual actions, but we realize it's about lifestyles, trends, patterns. And what patterns and trends do I need to change to continuously walk with the Lord and be more like him? Things to think about, right? Lord Jesus, we just thank you for this time. As always, may your word lead us and guide us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Be blessed.